I'm Carmine Gallo with John Doerr, chair of Kleiner Perkins, the venture capital firm best known for early investments in Amazon and Google, along with Ryan Panchad Saram, a technical advisor at Kleiner Perkins. Both are experts in clean tech, and both are co-authors of the new book, Speed and Scale, a book that clearly explains the climate crisis and, most importantly, proposes a very specific plan, a solution for averting a climate catastrophe. We'll get to that in a moment. But today we're talking about leadership, communication, and how to communicate hard things and hard facts in a way that people can understand. So John, Ryan, nice to have you here. Nice to talk to both of you. I'm a fan of both of yours. Congratulations on making something incredibly complex, somewhat easy to follow. Well, I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be with you for this conversation. And it grew out of a conversation some 15 years ago when my teenage daughter, Mary, with some friends of mine, after having seen Al Gore's video, had a dinner discussion. And we said, what do you think? And when it came Mary's turn to speak, Carmine, she looked directly in the eye and she said, Dad, I'm scared and I'm angry. Your generation created this problem. You better fix it. And I was speechless. I had no idea what to do then.
I would be too.
So I set out with my partners to learn as much as we could about this field. We began investing in clean tech solutions. Al Gore's movie brought this to the world's attention. And over the course of 3 venture funds, we backed 70 or more entrepreneurs in their companies, invested $1 billion in those companies, learned some really hard lessons. People gave up on us. We didn't give up on them. We stood by them. And in the end, they not only took a lot of carbon out of the equation, but they produced returns so that $1 billion is worth some $3 billion today. So it shows that clarity and staying power and hope are really required to solve this problem of the climate crisis.
John, I'm glad you brought up An Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's documentary. I was one of the first columnists to begin writing about that documentary years ago because it started its life as a presentation. And I don't think a lot of people know that An Inconvenient Truth was originally a PowerPoint presentation. And I use that as an example to remind people that a presentation can trigger a movement if it is done effectively and communicated simply. So let's talk about this from the aspect of communication. Ryan, in the book Speed and Scale, you call climate change humanity's greatest challenge. Well, if that's the case, I'm going to argue that explaining climate change and its solutions is humanity's greatest communication challenge. You were a deputy chief technology officer for the U.S. under President Obama. Now you're technical advisor at Kleiner Perkins, working closely on clean tech with John. What have you learned about communicating complex issues in a way that all stakeholders can understand?
You know, the book draws on a concept called OKRs, objectives and key results. And, 2019 Christmas time, John and I were having a conversation about the climate crisis. And the question came up of what would it look like if you applied OKRs to the climate crisis, right? 59 gigatons of emissions every year, get that into zero. What would be the KRs that could support it? What would be the objectives? And so, Carmine, we leaned on a goal-setting tool that we know really well, right? This tool is used by leaders to take their grand ambitions and turn them into very clear direction. And so what we did as engineers and investors is we started talking to experts in the field. Over almost 100 conversations led to the creation of the plan that you see. And we described the plan in the terms of OKRs. What is our objective? Right? The what, and then the how, these key results that show us if we've accomplished that objective.
Gets into the details, right? Objective are the top line goals. Key results are the results that we need to achieve in order to achieve the goals.
Correct.
Correct?
And this would be a good time to make sure that your readers and audience know they can get this plan for free right
Yes,
now
yes.
at speedandscale.com. They
Right.
can print it out two-sided on a piece of legal paper. You can download a PDF, but you should have this while you're listening to this conversation.
I love this, and I am going to use this in my own workshops when I talk to leaders and executives about communicating complexity, because I don't think people, there's no way they're going to understand just how complex this crisis is. I mean, we got 400 pages in the book that go into much more details, but the fact that you were able to set out a plan that's only about 6 objectives, the 4 kind of fold under one of them. This is extraordinary. And I'm absolutely sure most people will not understand just how hard it is to take that much complexity and put it into these 6 objectives. Was it as hard as I think it was?
Well, Ryan deserves credit for it. I'm quite sure that it's his genius together with another member of our squad, Anjali Grover.
Yep.
But we argued over these and took some were obvious, but most were not. And of course, the objectives everyone will pretty quickly agree upon.
Okay.
The magic is in the key results.
That's where I think we're going to have a communication challenge, right? Those are all very complex and pros and cons.
We like to say the objective is what you want to have accomplished.
Okay.
The key result is how you're going to get it done. Okay. What and how, objectives and key results. Now, the ultimate challenge here is trying to figure out how to get people to care. How to get people to care, because it's a how problem. It's not a what problem. Lots of people are aware of this, but not enough are moved to act. And so that's what the book does. It presents a path forward to move beyond just describing the problem in John Doerr techno speak, but focus on the actions that we can take to decarbonize. And importantly, for people to act, they've got to believe there's hope. And so you need to be balanced. You need to ground the urgency and the ambition and the reality that everything we're doing today is not enough, together with a path that we might be able to achieve. Because if you destroy hope, we'll give up.
Well, John, when you say how to get people to care is the challenge, I agree with you. I've actually worked with many energy executives over the past decade. I understand the scale of carbon and fossil fuels that runs everything that we do, how hard it's going to be to get to these goals. I never worried about getting people to accept that carbon emissions are damaging and bad things are happening. I wasn't worried about getting the majority of people to accept it, especially now that it's visceral. You know, we live in Silicon Valley. The fires 2 years ago came within a mile of my house. Now it's visceral: droughts, fires, storms. But I think the bigger challenge, John and Ryan, if you agree, is going to be how do you get people to care about something that just seems so abstract and so far off? What have you learned through the process of writing the book and investing in clean tech since 2006? What have you learned that all leaders and scientists need to understand about communicating this complex issue? I'll ask both of you, John.
Well, I'll start, and I'm sure Ryan will amplify my view here. You have to speak to both the head and the heart at the same time. You have to do it with clarity, and you have to do it in a way that's memorable. We've already covered the OKRs. I want to say a word or two and invite Ryan to talk about the storytelling, because what people remember from the time we were hunter-gatherers is storytelling. You can imagine those happening in caveman eras of society. And so having an arc to a story, having an identifiable person, an antagonist, a protagonist, these are time-honored techniques that we've used throughout the book to create memorable, inspiring archetypes, role models.
Oh,
our readers.
interesting. Okay, that's why we have stories from Mary Barra, Bezos, Gates, Gore. That's why we brought in all of these other leaders and experts to tell their stories. Interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I'm an expert in business storytelling, but applying storytelling to this complex issue, I think that's very clever, very creative. Ryan, please, can you dive into that a little bit more? What exactly do we mean by storytelling, and how does that help us communicate this issue?
Of course. And so, like John said, the head and the heart, those OKRs are the head, right? They show you the measures that matter. If you actually look across the action plan, you're going to see which KRs actually remove the most gigatons, right? So Carmine, the hope for the action plan is it shows which and where leverage needs to happen to truly move the gigatons. So there's no question, right? Because we can't get distracted by bright and shiny objects. And so the head is the plan, but the heart are these stories. And so every single objective has 2 or 3 stories of leaders showing what's possible, showing the trails they've blazed, showing us the challenges ahead as well too. And so in those, the Mary Barras, the Ethan Browns, the Margos, the Christiana Figueres, the John Kerrys, these are our heroes. These are our role models. Part of the book is to lift them up and to show the world who they are, but also for the world to go, oh, I can do that too. I can be like them. And so that's what the book tries to do.
So we tell the story of a cross-country track team in Virginia, and they're running behind diesel school buses, and they know that's bad. So they team up, those are students, with parents, and they get the whole district to adopt clean electric buses. Or the story of the scrappy group of lawyers who, with funding from Michael Bloomberg, shut down about 1/3 of the coal-fired power plants in the US, the Beyond Coal movement. Or entrepreneurs trying to figure out how to make a plant-based protein that tastes better than a Big Mac. And that led Ethan Brown to create Beyond Meat, and so on and so on and so on. So there's stories of indigenous leaders in tribes in the Amazon. The book is written for leaders. We are not trying to convince people to take individual virtuous action, like buying an electric vehicle when they can or installing solar. Mm-hmm. That's all assumed. But Carmine, that's not going to get us where we need to go. We need much greater urgency. We need speed and scale. Yeah. And so we've got to find the leader inside of every reader and enable and inspire her. One of my favorite stories of storytelling was with a reviewer of the book who told me that every night before she puts her daughter to bed, they read a couple pages of the book and they talk about it, explaining that part of the problem or the opportunity or the hope. And I'll tell you, I never imagined when we wrote these OKRs that they'd be used to address the very real fears and anxieties that the next generation has about this problem that my generation created and hasn't fixed.
John, you brought up leadership. When speaking, what speaking and communication advice do you now have then for CEOs, leaders, startup founders, activists, but people who may not be scientists, they're not clean tech experts, and yet, as you suggest in the book, especially most large companies must show what they are doing in terms of sustainability and their plans to reduce carbon emissions. So as a CEO, non-scientist, what advice do we have for them in communicating what their companies are doing?
Well, I'm going to pull Brian in answering this question because he's a superb communicator, but I begin by advising these leaders to tell a personal story, tell a memorable personal story to engage your audience. And where would you go from that, Ryan?
Once you have the story to pull them in, Carmine, you got to set that goal that's incredibly ambitious, supported by key results that are incredibly measurable. We really are pushing every organization to set their own OKRs, right? Most of the pledges being made by companies today, or even world leaders today, in the 2050, 40, and 30 timeframes are too far out, right? Most people won't be in office then. Most people still won't be the CEOs then. And so John and our team and the Speed and Scale mantra is set goals for 2022, set goals for 2025. Like, we need to take this action now. And take a look at OKRs. They're actually a pretty easy, simple way for you to articulate them.
Yep. And repeat them, communicate those goals consistently, because people will see right through a leader who is just giving voice to something, putting up a poster, and not living those actions and living their words.
And the Speed and Scale plan is more than a book and more than a poster. It's a website, it's a platform. We'll be highlighting progress,
Great.
best practices, creating community. But to act, people have got to believe there's hope. And yet at the same time, we can't understate the magnitude of what needs to be done.
John, I am really impressed with anybody who can explain a complex problem and a solution on a napkin. Can you please tell us briefly the Franklin Roosevelt napkin story that opens your book, Speed and Scale? Because I think that sets the foundation for everything.
Well, thank you very much. You know, with this climate crisis, we have lots of goals, but we don't have a plan. And so I was very inspired by a napkin, which is in the beginning of the book here, you'll see it.
Yep.
Where in 1942, Henry Hap Arnold, who was the general of the US Army, had a meeting with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it wasn't looking very good then. And that is winning the war. And so Roosevelt laid out 3 very simple objectives, which provided clarity and focus, and honestly inspired us in writing the Speed and Scale plan. Those were hold 4 key territories, attack Japan, and defeat the Nazis in France. And that's what, of all the choices, they focused the war campaign on, and it succeeded. Well, the connection with our plan is that we have just 6 great objectives, and they all fit on a napkin together with 4 accelerators. And we use that to organize the book. And Ryan, you might even open the book to the page that shows our napkin. There you have it, net zero by 2050.
That's extraordinary. That really is extraordinary. I don't think people appreciate just how hard it is to do that. I've spent hours, days with startup founders who are launching a new product, and we're trying to explain it simple on a napkin or on one piece of paper or a whiteboard, and that's hard enough. To do what you've done in terms of gathering all of this information on a climate crisis and its myriad solutions and put it on a napkin, no one is going to appreciate how much work that takes, but well, I do. So thank you.
You've written some amazing books on a friend and hero of mine, Steve Jobs, who was the master of very clear, concise thinking and communications. He would never have a slide with more than a few words on it, or perhaps a photo. And so he's inspired me.
Let's talk about some of your other companies, by the way. Apple, obviously, I still consider Steve Jobs one of the greatest storytellers of all time. But also with Amazon, I think that there is an underappreciated aspect of Bezos. For a completely different project, I've been analyzing all 24 of his shareholder letters, which are models of simplicity and clarity. And obviously with Google as well. You, John, have written about Sergey Brin and Larry Page as people who have been able to explain things clearly. Do you think that a leader's ability to simplify complexity is more important now than maybe ever before? Is it an important skill? Tell me why.
Yes. Most of the problems that matter take more than a lone inventor or scientist to solve them. They take the action of teams, groups of people, and people are inspired by leaders. So I like to say that ideas, relatively speaking, are easy. I worship at the altar of innovation. It's execution, though, that's everything. Ideas are easy, execution's everything. And it takes a team to win, to inspire a team, to enable it to succeed. You need a great leader. You need a great communicator. You need a storyteller. There needs to be poetry in the way our leaders inspire others.
Oh, we'll end on that. John and Ryan, thank you so much. Speed and Scale is a book that we talked about the fact that it's good for leaders, but I think it's a valuable book for anyone who wants to understand the climate crisis, how we got here, why it's so urgent that we act now. I've read a lot of books on the subject. I'm still, I think I'm a little better than average in terms of my knowledge because I've worked with energy executives, but I'm still unsure and unclear about a lot of things. The first 10 pages of your book explain very, very simply and well. So I think it's for everybody who just wants to understand why we're even talking about it.
It's for everybody, and it's especially for our daughters. It's for the Greta Thunbergs and others of the world. That's what gives me great hope, is the impassioned anger of youth, because we've created this problem and we haven't fixed it.
John, thank you so much. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy that conversation with one of the world's most influential investors. My goal is to bring you the experts who will make you a better leader. If you'd like to be reminded of new videos, subscribe to Carmine Gallo TV, and please spread the word. I'll see you next time. Thanks.